comedians often struggle with mental illness. You probably know that artists in general typically struggle with mental illness. And one of the concepts I've been exploring here more recently, say over the last few years, has been that all expressions of art, for the most part, stem from some inner instinct to respond to distress and mental illness. So art is a reflex of mental illness, a instinct to cope and understand and grow, hopefully heal. The last part is the most important part, healing, if all possible. If at all possible. So comedians often are very depressed people. And, it's hard to tell which came first, the comic or the depression, I think most likely the comedian is a flower that buds from the plant of depression, from the plant of some kind of mental illness. And we have to remember that depression and anxiety are, two faces of one coin for the most part. They're very symbiotic, they very interdependent. You can often have both. Usually you have both symptoms of depression and anxiety at the same time. You can get depressed from being anxious, and you become anxious after being depressed for a while. So comedians suffer depression, and part of this is past traumas. Part of this is sheer disposition to existentialism. And what I mean by that is some of us are here to sing the blues, Some of us, just from a young age, just seem to be very self-aware. And in mental health and psychology, self-consciousness, self-awareness can actually be a negative trait at some point, because you can become very, you can start ruminating on yourself, and your imperfections, and you're constantly hyper-aware of your mortality and, again, your imperfections. You're hyper-aware of everything that's gone wrong. You're hyper-aware of where you could be going, and just the fleetingness of it all. It's very existential. Life is an existential experience by all means. And all we're ever doing is really trying to escape that acknowledgement. We try to keep busy. Comedy in essence is a couple things for comedians. It's a defense against intrusiveness, existentialness. It's using humor to ward away the demons. And it's an attempt to heal through laughter, and to heal through love. The highest moment in a comic's life is that audience reaction, that gut, wrenching laughter, where you look out and you see people with tears in their eyes and their faces are red, and they just love you, and you're killing. You see it on the comic's face. It's the greatest experience. So it's got to be up there with watching your child be born, for them. So comics, they use humor to distance intrusive emotions. And I'm going to bring this full circle because I want to tie in an underlining problem that a lot of comics face, a lot of them have, and a lot of them develop at some point, and that's narcissism. So they use humor to distance. That needs to be understood first. Why do they do that? That's the second thing to understand. I'd like to look at it through the lens of narcissism and through the lens of reaction to depression. It's I'm depressed or anxious, and maybe it's just my personality. There's a lot of factors that go in here, but for whatever reason, I can't handle these intense emotions, so I need to push them away. If something happens that I feel uneasy, even if it's a good moment, even if it's something beautiful and it's just too much, because comics are really hypersensitive people, then I'll use the comedy to sort of, make a joke, push it away. That way I can sort of digest it at my own pace, if you will. So let's talk about narcissism. Narcissism is not what people think it is. A lot of people look at narcissism as just being this thing of like, well, if someone's narcissistic, that just means they're, self-centered, right? And they're evil. They don't give a shit about anyone else but themselves. And it's like, well, sure, that's a symptom of it. That's a symptom of it. Just as we can look at PTSD and someone could say, well, what's PTSD? And another person would say, well, I saw a guy at bar at PTSD, freaked out on everyone. I think PTSD is an anger condition. It's an explosive condition where people get triggered and they freak out. And, well, sure, there is a percentage of people that experience that, and that is a symptom, can be a symptom. But that's not how we would truly frame PTSD, right? He would say, well, here's a person who went through tremendous trauma and it was kind of psychologically scarred from me, psychologically altered, changed their brain chemistry. Now they're got this fight or flight panic thing that just goes off at the drop of a hat, any sound, any hypervigilant trigger, I guess you could say. So narcissism needs to be understood as far as childhood trauma, reaction to childhood trauma. That's where it's born typically, right? And what happens is the child experiences trauma, pain, abuse of some sort, and the child isolates himself, or the child was isolated in childhood, by their parents, had a lonely childhood, and they start to go inner. They go inside. And they start to only trust themselves. They learn to distance themselves, and they learn how to see the environment in a hypervigilant way, in a very actually an advanced way as far as body language and nonverbal cues. Learning how to protect themselves in the environment became very critical from a young age. More critical than most people go through, right? This is how you get narcissism. It's how you get a damaged personality, a wounded person. So they have to go inside, and they have to become hyper dependent on themselves. And in that process, what happens is they push people away, essentially. And that's where you see all this ugly stuff that starts emerging, this manipulation behavior from a narcissist, this coldness, this apathy, this inability to connect, this OCD tendency to only confide in themselves, to only trust in themselves. People become, objects and means to an end. So it's quite sad when you consider where narcissism comes from. It's not just an asshole that wants to manipulate people, but if you picture a child that was abused, that learned that, through this abuse that they can only trust themselves, and then as they grew up, it just has manifested in some really ugly ways, then you have a little more understanding and compassion to the situation. So a lot of comedians are damaged people, and they were damaged early in their life. I think to even be a comedian, you have to have a sense of screw it, as I call it. You got to have the screw it factor. At some point in your life, you just go, screw it. I'm going to get on stage in front of a handful of strangers, not knowing what the hell I'm doing, not ever having, been taught or gone through college or some training for this. I'm just going to get on stage in front of a handful of drunks and try to be funny. And nobody's funny the first time, so nobody's funny the first 100 times. So you have, you just have you dying on stage for a good 100 times. And you have to be mental for that. Or you have to just say, screw it. I don't care. You have to be at this point of almost brokenness, of almost giving up, but not quite. You're just here. You're like a transit soul. And now you got like a chip on your shoulder, and you're going to go out and deliver some funny stuff. And that's where the magic happens, actually. That's where the magic happens. We're all just responding to this life. We're all responding to our own neurotic traits and our own mental illness and our own traumas, bouncing off each other, trying to help each other, trying to heal ourselves. And art has become, this amazing cathartic tool that can help us and heal and inspire, generations of people, can move cultures. So comedians are driven. They have this purpose. They have this sense of duty, but they're wounded. At the same time, they're wounded. Like I said, usually goes back from childhood. They have this strong sense of narcissism in them. And they risk isolating, and they risk suicide Comedians have some of the highest rates of suicide of any um, artist out there, musician, author, actor. Comedians have very high suicide rates, and they also have a lot of problems with drugs and alcohol, food addiction, and OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Comedians are very obsessive. Comedy's an obsession. But they suffer to bring us a catharsis, right? That's what they're after. It's not just a selfish thing to go out there and laugh. I'm talking about the really good comedians. I'm not talking about the guy that goes out there and he's just trying to tickle you to get some kind of, immediate laughter and gratification. But the guy that's going out there, like a guy like Bill Hicks, who went out there with something passionate that he wanted to say, and he fought those crowds, and he got booed off, out of the clubs some nights, many nights, because he wasn't going to go out and tickle people. He wasn't going to go out with a hammer and smash fruit. He wasn't going to do the Carrot Top routine. And in fact, he went too far, maybe, as far as comedy can go. He went as far as you could take comedy, I think, and take it into an intellectual experience and still have it be comedy. And he was a damn good comic. So it was a rare soul. But my point is, look at a comic as a kind of wounded healer, I think is the best perspective. And not just look at him as like the silly jester. Even Kevin Hart, when you look at a guy like that, he's got a story. I'm willing to bet. You sit down, this guy would blow your mind with a story about how he came up and what he's gone through and what he sees comedy as and why he does it and how he feels about it. I mean, if you really could get inside that guy's head, it would be, it would probably blow a lot of people's mind. They probably wouldn't believe what they would be hearing because they have this notion of, he's just the funny guy. I remember him in high school. He was the funny guy. Which I assure you, there's a lot more going on underneath the surface, right? But here's my problem. Why don't so many comedians heal? Why don't so many artists heal from their art of any kind? I'm always looking for that in artists that I see that are wounded or artists that are using their artistic medium as a catharsis for themselves and hopefully for the audience. And I just go, what's happening here? Why are they not healing? Are they trying to heal? Did they get lost somewhere along the way? Is it something that can't be healed? Or maybe they've healed a certain degree. And why do so many of them get worse? Why do so many of them get on drugs and alcohol and commit suicide? Why do they isolate? Why so many bad marriages? Failed investments? Failed interpersonal, relationships? And again, it's because there's an underlying mental illness happening here. And there's also a lot of bad, poorly learned coping methods. A comic is such a weird thing. As you're going on stage, you're getting the love of hundreds, if not thousands of people, maybe millions of people. But at the end of the day, you walk off and you're by yourself again. It's a very isolating experience for them. And their personality is such, most of them, that they kind of prefer that isolation a bit. They want big interactions at their leisure. That's why comics like being on the road, and they like deciding when they want to schedule a show, how many shows they want to do. If they want to take a 6 months hiatus, they can. It's very much on their terms. But why aren't more comedians healing? One of my favorite examples of an artist healing is the lead singer of Tool in A Perfect Circle, artist named Maynard James Keenan. And if you look at this guy's early work, clearly on drugs, clearly young and lost and struggling, but had a great vision, had to come to some kind of enlightenment within himself. But now the work has to be done. Because having that aha moment, that awakening moment, is not enough. You can be like the Buddha at 22, sit under a tree, have an apple fall, hit you in the head, and suddenly you understand it all. You go, oh God, I get it. I get my mortality finally. I get what this life's about, the ride. And and the other part isn't just getting it. The other part, the last part, the hardest part, is accepting it, is surrendering into it. It's like we all want the knowledge, but when the knowledge comes, it's too hard to swallow, you know? We're not getting out of it alive. Many of us will die before we're old. It's just the way it is. Many of us won't reach our goals. Many of us will have horrible things happen to us. Many of us will have beautiful things happen to us. Many of us will totally exceed our goals. You know, life's a wonderful ride, but it is a yin and yang experience, right? And again, going back to how I opened this, we're trying to disassociate ourselves from the harsh realities of this thing. And comedians, like other artists, reacting to neurosis, they see it. They have a great perception of the world as it really is. Here's an interesting fact. You know, when you're depressed, it's true that when dealing with ambiguous or abstract situations or information rather, where there's missing information, you have to sort of put your own inference there. Often is the case that you see things more negatively. You know, if you're depressed and you're standing in line and you see a guy look at you, your first instinct might be, is he judging me? You know, what's he looking at? What's wrong with me? You kind of go to a automatic negative affect, negative response. However, what studies are now finding is that can happen in, you know, more severe situations particularly. But mild depression, for the most part, it doesn't. And what it does negatively, it outweighs with what it reduces the other way. Meaning, most of us walk through life with rose-colored glasses, and that's actually the bigger threat than walking around negative. You know, I'm saying not negative, but realistic. And that's what they're finding with comedians. It's not negative to go, hey, one day we're going to die. That's reality. It's reality. But people say that's negative. Knowing your mortality, looking at the world and seeing the condition that it's really in the bigger picture of it. Not hiding behind, God damn it, not hiding behind religion or some ideology or whatever it is to sort of, again, mentally escape, doing some kind of gymnastic maneuver to get over the fact that, yes, you will die too. Yes, you will get sick too. Yes, you are aging too. Yes, you're in a car driving down an icy road and you've begun to lose control, and you're sliding. And you're going to hit a wall or something. You know it's going to be bad soon. And everybody around you is going, hey man, just calm down. Try to relax. It's just a ride. It's just a crash. It's a ride, but it's also partially a crash, right? It's like you're trying to gracefully crash, I think is the art of it. Graceful crashing. The Art of Life by David Powers, right? Let's give him my next book. Anyway, this is important stuff because if we understand the nature of us and the nature of ourselves better, there's something that phenomenal that can happen. And it's a kind of desensitizing. It's like exposure therapy. Take what your greatest phobia is, and if you slowly introduce someone to it, gradually over time they'll become less afraid. And I'm not suggesting everybody run around, 24 hours a day contemplating their mortality. But what I am suggesting is if you're someone that goes around 24 hours a day trying to escape your mortality, you're breeding a huge problem. There's a huge deficit, a huge gaping hole, a pit inside you that you're creating, and you're just trying to throw sticks and leaves over the entrance of this hole as if it doesn't exist. So comedians have this great ability to see reality and to see truth and see the world for what it is, and that's what they put in their comedy, and that's what we love them for, because they give us a spoonful of truth and a spoonful of something of sugar, as I think Wanda Sykes said. Something sweet to help the medicine go down. And that's what they do. They are reeling us back from our instinct to run the freak away from life, right? And they're saying, "Come on back here. Let me make you laugh a little bit. Let me give you a little bit of a shoulder massage," and then boom, little trinkets of life. And it's great, and it's jarring, and some comedy's too much for people, and they freak out and get outraged and walk out. But it's serving a purpose. It's desensitizing us to the worst, but not in a way that promotes the worst. That's the fear. When people hear someone talk about something dark on stage, they instantly get afraid and go, well, should we be condoning this? Because if we condone this, where's it going to go? If kids play violent video games, won't they kill people? No, there's no correlation there. There's no correlation. It's your fear. And I would say it's not only your fear of what you say you're afraid of, that there may be a correlation here with a comic saying dark things on stage is somehow going to lead to the degradation of society. I think what you're afraid of is what the comedian's saying, or any of the artists saying, whatever they're saying, is going to lead to a degradation of your ego. And I mean the parts of your ego that have gotten really good at putting on a big bulletproof vest, just clothing itself in vests. That's what the ego tries to do, by the way. That's what it's always trying to do. And we're always trying to take these armors off. Your ego wants more locks, more security. It's afraid. Exists in time. Your whole identity exists in time. It's a time-based sense of self. Because if you sit in the moment, you just stop thinking. You stop thinking about who you are. And that's where it gets difficult for some of us. Because then we have to go back to instinct. Do you know who you are based on how you feel? Or do you know who you are because, if you put it out on a chalkboard, I can write it all out for you. I'm a male, I'm white, I'm a comic, I make this much money a year. I live here, I grew up in Boston, I did it. You can make the persona and you can wear it and it'll make you feel good. But the hardest thing is to remove it, be instinctual. That, my friends, is the real struggle. And that's why I think a lot of comics, like a lot of artists, like a lot of people struggle. And maybe a lot of us don't even know that's a big part of the journey, is removing the false and reconnecting with the real, the basis of all religion, right? Isn't that what the basis of religion is? Removing the illusion so we can get back to God, so we can know ourselves. Know God, know yourself. That's what they teach us.